Do you remember really looking forward to being an adult? I certainly do. I remember when I was a young kid and I was like, oh my God, when I'm 18, when I'm a man, I'll be able to do all these adult things. And I'll be able to go on all kinds of adult adventures. And then I turned 18 and it was like something had changed in the world, but not inside of me. You know, I turned 18, 19 and someone forgot to mail me my adult brain. I don't know, you know, it was like all of a sudden society expected me to be an adult, to be responsible. It expected me to drink responsibly. It expected me to decide not to smoke marijuana. It expected me to not play with drugs. It wasn't until I had a couple of big relationship breakups that left me absolutely devastated that I began to question what it actually means to be an adult. And what I learned was that, as it turns out, I was being a child in all the moments in my relationships where I most needed to be an adult. And I was being an adult in all the times in my relationships that I most needed to be a child. And that was ruining my relationships. But it was also leaving me with a problem of feeling a sense of depression and anxiety in its wake. And once I became a dating coach, and I've been a dating coach for 10 years now, I've learned that many, many guys fall into this trap as well. So how about you? Are you making this mistake? Are you adulting at all the right times? Keep watching to find out. This video was actually inspired by another video that I watched recently called Are You Trying to Date Your Mother? By a mate of mine who runs a YouTube channel called Pinnacle of Man. And I highly recommend, by the way, that you check out his channel. I'll throw up a link to it here on the screen. He's a therapist that works mostly with men, and he creates some really incredible videos that I love to watch. And I think a lot of you guys are going to want to check out as well. But in this video, Are You Trying to Date Your Mother? I know it's a bit of a scary title, but he talks about our attachment styles and the way that as adults, we try to get love, or we try to connect with people or attach to women in our lives based on the traumas and the difficulties that we go through as children. Very often we haven't learned to deal with them as adults. And it made me think a lot about my own life and my relationships with women. And I realized that in the past, I really had a lot of moments where I fell into this very childish space. And I tried to understand the reason for it. And an example, one of the reasons for it from my childhood was that I grew up with a set of rules in relationships, a set of rules for how love ought to work. And I learned this from my parents, of course. And one of the rules I learned was that if you love a person, then you will do almost anything for them. It's kind of the Disney thinking as well, you know? And that if you're in a relationship with someone and they won't do almost anything for you back, then they don't truly love you. And this is really aberrant thinking. This is really dangerous thinking, because it means that any time that a woman doesn't match my extremely high expectations of what almost anything for me is, then she obviously doesn't love me. And this creates serious trouble because every human has limitations. We have to be able to look after ourselves as adults too. So if a girl I was dating was going through too much stress to help me with something, then rather than accept that she's going through something at the same time and can't help, I'd judge her and feel like she wasn't loving me. And so relationships just became untenable as a result. And it became a dangerous cycle because I would try to coerce the women I was dating into loving me the way I wanted to be loving. So I'd try to guilt them. You know, I'd say, you don't really love me. If you love me, you'd do X. You know, or you don't really care about what I'm going through. If you cared, you'd do Y. And so what I'd be doing is insulting their love for me. I'd be insulting them in the relationship and making them feel like they were never, ever good enough for me, even though a lot of these women were pretty great women. And the real kicker, the real difficult thing was that in retrospect, or even in the moment, I knew that I was being childish. Like I knew that I had switched gears in my brain. And yet I couldn't help myself. It was like the child had taken over my body and my rationale. And so the more often in relationships I'd flip into being a child in my emotional moments, the less she saw me as a man. And so the less she saw me as a man, the more she'd recoil. And the more she'd recoil, the more I'd flip into my child. The more I flipped into my child, the more she recoiled. And then she'd just like run away from me. And I couldn't understand why. Why am I not lovable? Now I wanted to interject here and clarify something before I go on. The problem isn't being emotional. See, a lot of guys think around a woman, I can't be emotional. I can't show emotions. I can't feel hurt. I can't feel insecure. Insecurity is always ugly. No, these emotions are fine and it's normal to feel them in life and in relationships. So you got to cast that aside. You're not supposed to not feel those things. But the problem for me and for a lot of men that I work with is actually that it's how we manage those feelings when they come up. So it's okay to say to a woman, hey, right now I'm feeling really insecure because. It's not okay to say, you're a bad girlfriend because, you're an idiot, I hate you, blah, 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 stomp foot, run away. When you go into your child to deal with these emotions, that's when you're not a man. That's when she sees you as a child. She doesn't see you as a man that she's going to be attracted to. So it's not the emotions that are bad, it's how you deal with them. In truth, I don't think I've ever worked with a client who hasn't gone through these emotional spats, who hasn't struggled to manage his little child, at least from time to time. So if you're watching this and you've been in a medium or long-term relationship, I'm guessing this counts for you too. So perhaps it comes out, your little child comes out when a woman rejects you, and that's why you struggle with approach anxiety. Or you fall into your little child when you get jealous and insecure and you try to control who she hangs out with and who she sees in her spare time and where she goes. Or perhaps you shut off emotionally and withhold love in order to punish her for some real or imagined transgression against you. We've all done it one time or another. So when a woman says she wants a man or a real man, I believe this is really what she's talking about. She wants a man who can manage his little child, who isn't going to fall into his childish way of dealing with emotions and trauma in his life every time things go wrong in the relationship. So how did I learn to work through this stuff? Well, the first thing I did was I actually started to take a journal, right? So at the end of every week on a Sunday evening, I'd start to write down and ask myself, when this week do I feel like I fell into being a child? When do I feel like I fell into this space? And it might have come up when I had an argument with my girlfriend at the time. Or it may have come up when one of my friends said something on social media that kind of bothered me and I was like dwelling over it all morning. And I'd take these and I'd start to write down why. Why did I fall into my little child? What got me into this space? What was I trying to achieve? What was the purpose of it all? And I learned something that was really profound. And I think it's profound for most men to understand this. When we fall into our child, when I fell into my child, but every man, when we fall into our child, we want something. So something gets triggered emotionally and we want an emotional need to be filled. But what we do is we try to get that emotional need filled the way we would have done it when we were little kids. We stomp our feet, we have temper tantrums, we cry, we whinge, we do all these things that they're not logical, rational, thinking adult things to do. That's why I call it your little child. We fall into this space of things we would have done as a kid. And it's like we forget how to adult in those moments. Yeah, we try to solve the problem from the mindset of a child, but we have an emotional need. There's a key emotional need that we want filled. And when I started to look over and over again, when do I get triggered? For what reason? I started to ask myself, why? What did I want? What did I want in every moment that I fell into my child? What did I want that I'd forgotten how to ask for or how to get from the world around me? And for me, personally, it'll be different for you. But for me, it was the feeling I had was I wanted to be reminded that I was loved. It was as simple as that. And I was falling into my child because that was my strategy that I'd learned to be reminded that I was loved. Evidently doing that as a kid got me reminded that I was loved. So I started doing it in my relationships. I'd manifest that same strategy. And it doesn't work in relationships with women. Women don't want to be your mum. They want to be your partner. And so that was a terrible strategy. Now, it'll be different for everyone, right? So for me, it was I wanted to be reminded that I needed to be loved. For other guys, it might be you want to be reminded that you are respected. I've had clients like that. I've had clients that want to be reminded that their opinion matters, that women care about what their opinion is. Or men who want to be reminded that they are interesting, that they do have something interesting to contribute, that they do have value. So it's different things for different men. But the first key is to realize what is the nugget of that thing you really want. So then what I did was I then approached my partner at the time and I had a discussion with her. I said, hey, I've realized that oftentimes I want to be reminded that I'm loved. And this is why I'm lashing out at you sometimes. And I need to deal with it and learn to deal with it. Would you mind reminding me whenever you see me doing this and falling into this space, and I'll do my best to like become conscious and fall back into my adult and have a better conversation about this. And that was step number one, because it's not bad to admit that you got flaws as a man. That doesn't make you less attractive. In fact, owning your shit, right? Owning, being an adult about the problems and insecurities you have in life is attractive to women, oddly enough, right? Not in a first date, but in a long-term relationship. Women want that self-development process. They like to see that. But I also went and I saw a therapist to work on this. And what I had to learn, and what every man has to learn, is how to look after and nurture his inner child. So I needed to feel loved. I needed to tell myself, to learn how to remind myself that I was loved without needing to turn to the world to make me feel loved. That was a really important lesson for me, and I did that with the help of a therapist. So at the end of this, it was all dandy, right? Life was perfect, and I never fell into this trap again, and it was great. No. You see, I'd learned another dangerous lesson. This is another dangerous lesson that a lot of men unfortunately pick up in their lives. The lesson is this, that your child is bad. You should never be a child around women. You should never be childish. Women don't want a child. They only want an adult. They only want a man, and that's it. Now, this was bad, actually, because with this mindset, because I became single, I broke up with my partner at the time, not for this reason, for other reasons, but it was harder all of a sudden to pick up women. Like, I couldn't pick up women. Like, I needed to be a child to pick up women. What was up with that? And I realized that I was starting to get depressed, and I started to have a lot of depression and anxiety by being an adult all the time. And as it turns out, it's important to be a child for two reasons at certain moments. First of all, it's an important part of being human, is that actually you aren't just all adult. You are adult and child. That little child within you needs to go out. But just like a child in real life, you let the child out to play when it's an appropriate time to play. It's an appropriate time to be childish. When is it appropriate to be childish? Well, I learned that my child needed to come out when I flirted. When I'm flirting with girls, I'm being childish. I'm being naughty and boisterous and incorrigible. It's my little child coming out. And my little child comes out when I'm at a bar with mates, right? Or being silly and being a little bit immature. And that's when it comes out. My little child comes out when I'm playing board game nights with people. My little child comes out when I'm at a comedy night, right? And I'm giggling like a little schoolgirl. That's my little child coming out. And that's totally okay, because that's playtime. But my child doesn't come out when it's emotional, when it's upset, when it wants to throw a temper tantrum. So just like in the real world, if your child's having a temper tantrum, you take them in and you teach them how to deal with it, or you put them in sin bin, or you do whatever you need to do, but you don't make that child other people's problems. And so learning to be the adult to your little child is key. It really represents what it means to be an adult, to be a man. To be a man that women want to be around is a man who knows how to look after his emotions more effectively, to address emotional problems and insecurities in relationships around women in a way that is adult, that's grown up to do, that's well thought out, that isn't just the child having a temper tantrum. How about you guys watching? Have you experienced some of this before? Can you think of moments in relationships where it's fallen apart because you keep falling into that child space? I'd love to hear about it in the comments below. Now, I'd like to give you guys something for free, brand new. I've got an ultimate guide to seduction. It's an entire coaching program. You can get it for free right now by clicking on the link in the comments below. Go ahead and register for that, guys. If you liked my video, don't forget to subscribe to my channel so you don't miss out on any of my future ones. I'm Damien Deeker. Have a fantastic week.